Gen Z once dreamed of changing the world, becoming doctors, astronauts, mad scientists. Now we're seeing a rise in lazy girl jobs, quiet quitting, and a workplace culture built around doing just enough. To some, it's a crisis of ambition. To others, it's long overdue self preservation. From Philstar Life and PumaPodcast, welcome to Generations, a conversation about how different age groups see the world and why it matters. In this episode, a Gen Z and an Xennial unpack the shift. What does it really mean when a generation starts to say no to the hustle? I'm Angel Martinez, Philstar Life columnist, and with me today is Puma Podcast editor Jaemark Tordecilla. So excited to kick this off with such a polarizing topic.
Um, Thank you for having me here. So excited to get started on this conversation, Angel.
Thank you.
Siguro I'll start off. No, I read your column on Philstar Life. Siguro let's start for our listeners and viewers. Definition of terms. What is quiet quitting? What are lazy girl jobs? What is coffee badging? And all these terms that us titos and titas may not be familiar with.
Okay, sure. Let me fill you guys in. So I guess you can start with quiet quitting, which is like refusing to put in extra effort, kind of like mentally clocking out of your job when you just don't feel like it anymore. Coffee badging is something quite new that I heard of. It's kind of like showing up at the office like long enough to paramdam to your boss that you're there, and then you grab coffee and then you just go home. Rage applying, something a lot of my batchmates do, honestly. Like at the slightest inconvenience in their jobs, they just start sending their resumes to people with like open postings on LinkedIn. And then lazy girl jobs, it's like very low effort, but also high paying and preferably remote jobs. So yeah.
So, how prevalent is that among your generation? Have you been involved in any of those? Like, or is it just a thing we see on TikTok or Reddit or other social media platforms?
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of preface all of this by saying that we weren't always like this. Like, I feel like grew up still under the influence of Gen Xers and millennials who kind of put career at the center of their lives and kind of made it look like a key ingredient to a fulfilling existence. Like, I personally remember being brainwashed by the whole millennial pink, girl boss by Sophia Amoruso, Tumblr aesthetic. And I thought, hell yeah, like that's my purpose in life, to break glass ceilings and to build my own empire. But I think it's like kind of witnessing those who came before us getting laid off at work or kind of getting replaced by their bosses the moment they're unable to perform. That kind of cemented this idea in us that no matter how much effort or energy pala we put out, at the end of the day, we're still replaceable. Like we're still, disposable. So with that, it's like we no longer want to give it our all anymore and leave nothing for ourselves. So that idea, of course, like was prevalent on TikTok. That's kind of how it spread. But I think it's more than a passing trend. I'd like to believe that it's my generation like putting our foot down and kind of defining what work means to us today.
No, what is interesting about your column, no, and actually my biggest issue with it is that I would push back against the idea that your generation actually invented slacking off or doing a bad job at work because no, you did not invent that. So I'm as you mentioned, I'm an exennial. I was born in the early '80s. So I'm sort of sandwiched between the generation X and the millennial generations. And so I saw a sort of culture shift in terms of how we approach careers and work. So in Generation X, that was called the slacker generation for the longest time, right? It was after a movie directed and starred in by Richard Linklater. Ever heard of him?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So he's the guy behind Before Sunrise, Before Sunset,
Yeah.
very Gen X director, diba? And his first big movie was Slacker. And so because of that movie, Gen X was labeled the slacker generation. And it's interesting because even the term Generation X, it was popularized by Douglas Coupland he had a novel literally called Generation X. And in that novel, uh, he introduced the idea of Mac job, which is a dead end job with no future career prospects, and you just take on it to exist. And so that sort of defined the attitude of Generation X in terms of work and looking at careers. And so even the early installments of pop culture for Generation X was sort of framed as a choice between whether you would sell out to the man or you would pursue your artistic interests and live a bohemian life. And I mentioned before sunrise and before sunset earlier that the poster boy for Gen X was Ethan Hawke, who starred in a movie called Reality Bites. And
Mm.
ever seen that movie?
Yes, I have. I love that.
Okay, so the big gist of that movie is, Winona Ryder had a choice between Ethan Hawke, who was this handsome slacker, versus a suit, who was Ben Stiller, and so that was sort of the existential choice for Gen Xers, diba? Na, are you going down the path of selling out and building up a career versus, staying true to your art, etc., etc. Now, it's interesting because I mentioned I'm also part sort of the millennial generation. Siguro mga a few years after those movies, parang iba na yung message for millennials. The message was more about, hey, actually you can have it all. So you have movies like, Legally Blonde or Devil Wears Prada, where actually the message and a lot of it was aimed at women, as you mentioned, that you can have it all, 'di ba? The iconic line from Legally Blonde is,
What, like it's hard?
right? Because the idea is you can be kikai and wear pink and still be smart enough to get into Harvard Law and, get a boyfriend like Luke Wilson, right? And so I'm wondering, puro pop culture yung touchstones ko. Uh, Thinking about how uh, millennials and Gen Xers relate to work. How about you guys? Are there particular cultural touchstones that sort of defined how you approach work, career, how you think about life, or as you mentioned kanina, is it all TikTok?
I think it's also kind of like drawing from our own work experience and kind of realizing that everything that we dreamed would happen with our lives isn't actually all it's cut out to be. So it's like after that, we started reshaping what we think are our markers for success. Like we no longer just want to have the flashy title or the fat paycheck. Like that's not the priority anymore. I do hear a lot of people from my generation say that they're very much content with not loving their jobs anymore as long as they love the life that it pays for. Like they don't care if they don't find fulfillment in their desk jobs as long as it funds the girls' trips abroad or it helps them revive like their dead childhood hobbies. And to the point, like when we meet new people, when we go out in public, it's like there's this deliberate attempt to not introduce ourselves with what we do for work anymore. It's like I wouldn't want to be like, for example, hi, I'm Angel and I'm a writer, even if I have no problem with that. But I'd have to be like, hi, I'm Angel and I like to read and I like to watch movies. So it's really decentering work from our lives. We still acknowledge that it's important. We don't want to abolish work or avoid work altogether, but we just don't want it to be like the most important part of who we are anymore. So yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like you're sort of retreating from what you wrote in your column because the very idea of quiet quitting is, it's not just neutral. It's sort of hostile to the whole idea of being in that spot. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think like we personally cannot afford to actually quit our jobs with no backup plan naman. So that's just like our humble form of rebellion. I think Gen Z is just at the very least more strict about enforcing or observing our boundaries. And like we try to put our foot down when we can. So I don't know, as opposed to, for example, before, I heard that it was like the norm na you'd have to work overtime to kind of make a good impression on your boss so that you'd have like a better chance at getting promoted. Or like when a workmate would resign, automatically like it's fine with you if if their workload gets transferred to you. I don't know, but at the very least, like Gen Z is open to questioning like these expectations. Like, why is this the default? Like, why do I have to show up to work on a Friday night, like after 6, when you're not paying me? Like, I could be out with my friends, like living my life. So maybe at the very least, it's important to interrogate why it's been normal, even if we're not as hostile as we'd like to believe. At least.
Yeah, okay. So not as hostile. That's very interesting, no? Because I've been both. Like I talked about the choice of the Gen Xer about whether to sell out or to throw themselves into their career and let that define them. And I've been both. I've been the terrible employee who nawalan ka future sa trabaho. And then I've also been uh the good employee, the good soldier who went above and beyond uh, to advance in my career. And what I found, and you alluded to this in your piece, no, na it's less about the generation, it's less about my personality, but it's about finding a good fit in terms of a career in which I'm inspired to really go above and beyond for what I do, not for my employer's sake, but for my personal pride. Uh, is that not a worthy goal anymore for your generation? Or is that something you still aspire to one day think about, you know, finding.
Yeah. I think it's also just kind of the jobs available to us at the market today. Not everyone is privileged enough to have these dream jobs that kind of inspire them to want to do better or to do the most like all the time. So maybe that's why we're also trying to shift around like what a dream life looks like for us right now. Because before that was kind of one of the main indicators, and you had a good life if you had a job that was like meaningful to you, that gave you purpose. Well, what a big buzzword from like a previous generation. But since not everyone has the luxury of that now, we're just trying to figure out like how else could I live a meaningful life if I don't have like this thing that other people said would make it my dream life. So, yeah. Although I also, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I also did want to bring up though, because I mentioned a while ago that Gen Z isn't as hostile as we'd like to believe. I do remember though that though we're not like hostile on purpose, we're not always striking a good balance din naman. Because there are times that we can be inconsiderate, especially when it comes to like putting our needs first or like prioritizing our self-care. I will say it's an important caveat that there are times when we fail to consider that we may be inconveniencing others. Like I saw something on TikTok kasi I think I mentioned it also in the column that there was a Gen Z employee who was asked to come in for an 8 a.m. meeting. And then she was like, oh, sorry, I can't because I have a workout class to attend. So that sparked debates online na parang, parang sumusobra na ata yung work-life balance ng kabataan ngayon or something. And because like we're so focused on like our self-care, like our priorities, it's like we don't think all the time na if we don't attend this meeting, someone will have to fill us in and they will be wasting their time. Or for example, in the meeting, it was discussed na you have to take on a coworker's workload and you're gonna be like, oh, I don't want to do that because that's outside the scope of my responsibility. You might end up causing delays in the long run because your team pala is very understaffed. Stuff like that. It's like there are times when our view of like what is right is kind of myopic. So if we want to put our foot down when other people inconvenience us, I think it's important for us also to check that we're not the ones inconveniencing others. So yeah, I felt it was an important point to raise.
Yeah, so you're making your my arguments for me. But
Oh,
I think there's something to be admired about the fact that, this new generation has the language. and the tools to have those boundaries. And for the longest time, we didn't have that. Uh, my only question there would be, in terms of finding a fulfilling career, and I think, uh, I mean, call me old school, but I think that's still a worthy goal. Uh, isn't that a chicken and egg problem? Because what I found is that, uh, you sort of have to a certain extent, you have to pay your dues, to build yourself up to the point where you have the privilege to choose, what career you would want to have. You have to build up your experience, you have to build up your network, you have to show that you're someone who can be relied upon to get things done. And if you don't put that investment in, especially early on in your career, uh, I fear that, you know, uh, it won't translate into you getting to a place where you can actually use all that experience and all that networks and all that privilege into something that, that's more intentional in shaping what you want out of your career. Because, you know uh we spend half our waking moments in at work, right? Whether it's in the office or online logged in. And so, is it, anathema to you that, uh, to invest so much time, and effort and, emotions into something that, uh, may or may not pay off? What's the calculus between, uh, investing that time and those emotions versus, just treating it like a job?
Hmm. Uh, I I don't mean to drag my generation when I say this. I think I'm stating like a fact, but we did grow up in a time of instant gratification, which is probably why we believe that this is something that we want now and we can achieve it now. So there's not much of like that long term thinking na, oh, like I'll have to work my way up, especially like from where I came from, like the school I came from and the people I interacted with. There's not really much of that thinking. We're kind of on an accelerated like mindset when it comes to our careers. Na parang we feel like everything is ours for the taking and we can make it anything we want it to be, which I guess is something we have to learn from our elders.
Let me ask you, do you think that, do you actually, like, do you have that entitlement?
I don't want to look like I'm not like other girls, but I honestly do believe that my job is an important part of who I am, which is why I can't really say that I subscribe to everyone else's belief.
No, but you raise a good point. I think, that, you know entitlement and ambition could be healthy. um I just have a hard time, uh reconciling the fact that, I mean, there's so much to admire about the Gen Z. You're woke in the best, in the best uh possible way you can be woke. Like, you're aware of issues, you're aware of boundaries, you're aware of, you're empathetic to others. And so it's sort of hard for me to square, a generation that could care about so many things and yet not care about career. Um, do you get what I'm saying? Am I making sense? So
Yeah,
how
I
do you
do.
explain that? You know, i- to me, it feels like an incongruence.
Yeah. I think it's also important to note that this mindset, yeah, as I mentioned, is more prevalent among those with privileged backgrounds because when I did research for the column, also, many Filipinos are still living from paycheck to paycheck. And I do know of some outliers from my generation who are already breadwinners of their families, who have to take on multiple side hustles to get by. So it's not like these people can afford to just show up to work, get coffee, and then leave, or like not be pabibo to their bosses because like they want a promotion, like they need a promotion. and they can't resign just when they feel like it because they don't have a backup plan. So I will say that even if this is like a mindset that's rooted in like Gen Z values, I do think it's still you'd still have to have some sort of a safety net to be able to think this way. Like to have the idea that if a job doesn't satisfy you anymore, you can just decenter it because not everyone can do that really. So
Yeah, and I suppose that's also why the term is quiet quitting and not just quitting, right?
mm.
Um, is it hard for Gen Zers to quit? Like, is it hard for you? Is it a matter of just economics, or uh, is it a fear of not having a safety net, or is it a fear of confrontation rather than talking to your boss and demanding something? You just do the passive aggressive thing and quiet quit.
I think it's also a matter of pride, like showing up to the office job that you always wanted and realizing that it it's not all you wanted it to be. And then just taking the easy way out doesn't feel like it sits well with like my generation. So as much as possible, we will complain. We will we will moan and groan and grumble, but we will still like sit it out for as long as we can, which is why it's quiet quitting and not actual quitting. So
Well, that's something else that I would push back against that your generation invented. Like every generation who's been at work, they gather around and they bitch and moan about work. And I've been part of that. I was one of the bitchers and moaners until I got promoted and I became the boss, and I wasn't part of that circle anymore. So I think that's more natural toward any white collar worker. um, and so what happens now? Like, what do you think are the prospects for Gen Z when it comes to building careers? Is it Are you on this terminal train where you just treat the job as a job and you just take your vacations and get your fulfillment out of that? Or is there any way to reverse this trend that you're seeing among your peers?
yeah, I think the best solution was the one like I saw was what I got from my source for the column. But then again, as I mentioned a while ago, it's not a privilege afforded to everyone. If you do happen to get a job that rewards you like mentally, emotionally, socially, it'll come naturally. Like since there's nothing to push back against, you will find yourself performing at your best and sometimes even above and beyond that. I'm lucky enough to have a job that doesn't drive me crazy and that I actually want to do to the point where it's become part of my identity. But that's not the case for everyone. So I can't really prescribe it. I guess until we reach that for ourselves, Gen Z will also have to learn how to compromise, to like to realize that we're not the only people in the workplace, that because like we're not a fan of what we're doing doesn't mean that we have to make it everybody's problem, I guess. But all these things considered though, like I still don't think that you should just cast our concerns aside or brush it off as like a fleeting trend because we're doing the bare minimum. I think it's true that we have to fine tune our approach still, but I don't know, maybe the fact that uh, corporate leaders, recruiters are taking notice of our behavior might be a sign that maybe we do have a point that work shouldn't be the center of our lives. It is an important part of who we are, but not the most important part of our lives. So at the very least, we've given our elders something to think about. Maybe.
Okay. I just have a couple of things to not naman counter that, no, but to add to that, as someone who did find a career that I would call fulfilling. Um I think uh it's worth seeking out. Um And my only pushback to what you said is that it doesn't just happen to you. Um, it's something wherein you have to put time in, to invest in, uh, to be intentional about finding those opportunities. Uh, and also, like I said, it's not given. So you have to really seek it out. And I feel like, look, it's it's perfectly fine to have a job and get married one day and raise your family and have a stable enough income. But I think there's something to be said about finding something you do, um, that inspires you every day. And I guess what I'm struggling with is that, look, I admire Gen Zers a lot with their values and their empathy, the issues they care about. I would think, such a promising generation, it would be a shame if they just, went into the workforce and became automatons rather than, catalysts for change inside their workforces.
Okay, I think that sounds like a good place to end this very fruitful and insightful conversation. Thank you so much for your time, Jaemark. I'm sure as young people will have a lot to learn from those who came before
And
us.
and old people also have a lot to learn from the younger generation.
Thanks for listening to this week's conversation. Stay tuned to Generations every Monday on Spotify and YouTube, and check out my column on Philstar Life.